So we are in a series, everybody. We are exploring the Eightfold Path. For those of us who were here last week, Mary Louise did a really excellent job of introducing this Eightfold Path. And I have the honor of beginning us off this evening with Wise View, also known as wise understanding. And just for some background for those of us who are trying to get ahead of these Buddhist lists, the Eightfold Path is also the fourth noble truth, so related to our understanding of suffering being part of life, and that there is a beginning of suffering, there's also a possible cessation of suffering, that this path is part of our hopefulness in extracting ourselves from needless suffering. So Wise View begins traditionally the Eightfold Path. Will be followed next week with Teresa's talk on wise intention. I think it's important to note that the path is not linear. There's a beginning with Wise View, which can also be seen as the end, as it circles around and it's not always consecutive. I also really appreciated last week how Mary Louise highlighted our word choice around, sometimes this path includes the word right in front of all of the factors, the 8 factors. I know a lot of us, myself included, appreciate this word of wise instead, as that word right can so easily lead us to thoughts of what is wrong. And the wisdom of ourselves right now, whatever wise view we might hold. Knowing that tomorrow there could be a deeper clarity around wise view, that we are on this continuum, being kind to ourselves. When I started exploring this topic for this talk, a story that I know we're all probably familiar with came to mind. Just a brief one about 2 fish swimming in the ocean. One of them asks the other, "How's the water today?" And the other one looks around and says, "What water?" And that can so often be our relationship to views. They can be so deeply held, deeply seated. They are the air that we breathe. And so naming that it can be somewhat scary at times to delve into wise view. What are these unconscious views that we've been holding? Might come to us from our families of origin, and definitely come to us from an imperfect society, our society of definite racial hierarchy, a culture that so easily disconnects ourselves from the earth of which we are a part, our kin. And so tonight, we'll be centering this idea of wise view in light of some of the core truths of Buddhist wisdom. It's alluding to one of these in the meditation. Just like these really beautiful autumn leaves. I don't know if anyone's noticed not noticed the maples, the oaks right now. Impermanence. This moment is fleeting. These lives are fleeting. The truth of impermanence, the truth of suffering, little sufferings, really deep, challenging periods of suffering. Also this truth of interconnection, the air we breathe connecting us all, our love for each other in the world connecting us all. So in light of these core tenets of Buddhist wisdom, we ask some questions around what our deepest views are, and one of which I alluded to also in the meditation. What really matters in our lives? What is worth doing? What is worth putting energy into? More broadly, are people kind? Is there enough in this world for everyone? Enough love, enough resources? Even if I make mistakes, am I lovable? Do I belong? So many of our core wise views inform how we might answer these questions. So as we move into this exploration this evening, I wanted to raise up a sutta as illustration. Many of us may be familiar with this sutta. It's quite well known. It's about a figure named Angulimala. The translation of that name, for reasons that I'll share with you soon, are finger necklace. If that gives you any clue where we're going. Angulimala was quite a character at the time of the Buddha. The Buddha had been teaching, so enlightened, for about 20 years at this time. And Angulimala was a very violent, strong person. He began by terrorizing a forest, the saying is, and then after all the villagers had fled from that forest, he began terrorizing the neighboring villages. And he was quite violent. He took lives. Each life was signified by a finger that he wore around his neck. And so the Buddha heard of Angulimala, went in that area, many people tried to prevent him from approaching this character, Angulimala. It just so happened that the Buddha came between Angulimala and this man's mother, who was to become his next victim. And the Buddha, walking at a slow, leisurely pace, approached this man, and Angulimala, in his patterned behavior, approached the Buddha quite rapidly, with some rushing. And then some kind of supernatural event happened where the Buddha, in his calm pace, kept walking. And Angulimala, rushing towards him, should have shortened the distance between them, but that wasn't happening. He rushed more, the Buddha continued his pace, and there was still the same distance. And this was quite scary to Angulimala. He stopped and shouted out, "Stop, monk, stop." The Buddha replied, "I have stopped, Angulimala. You stop," though the Buddha was still walking. So Angulimala continued, "When you are walking, monk, you tell me you have stopped. But now, when I have stopped, you say I have not stopped. I ask you now, O monk, what is the meaning of this?" And the Buddha replied, "Angulimala, I have stopped forever, forswearing violence to every living being. But you have no restraint towards things that breathe. That is why I have stopped and you have not. The sutta continues for some time. Angulimala abruptly is transformed in this moment. And the story goes that he joins the Buddha, becomes a monk, eventually finds enlightenment, does a lot of good in the world. I bring up the sutta because it's an illustration of kind of complete reversal of view with this chain of events. Speech changing, action changing, livelihood changing. Very sudden and abrupt. Some of us may have experienced spiritual awakenings, moments like this, where a light bulb goes off and suddenly we're a bit confounded by whatever insight we've had suddenly. For some of us, this could be unrelatable, and so I wanted to draw some parallels from history. Sometimes it's enlightening to see a longer view of time. And so it occurred to me that 70 years ago, 100 years ago, in this town, in this region, the system of Jim Crow oppression and terrorism was a commonly held view, the prevailing view, you could say. And of course, there's been measurable change. We still have a long ways to go. But you could see in the arc of time this kind of real comprehensive change in view. Similarly, and this might be looking through rose-colored glasses, I like to think of maybe 100 years from now, folks will look back at us and think what violence those people were inflicting on the natural world. Such wanton use of resources, such disconnection from our Mother Earth. We are doing the best we can now, and yet our view is always partial. There's always more wisdom, more clarity to find. It's also very true to say that in the span of a human life, spiritual insight doesn't often come with that kind of flash of lightning like it did for Angulimala. I know for me it's mostly come in small shifts. A morning sit alone in front of my altar, where it becomes so clear to me that something I've been fixating on really isn't that important. Just letting go. Or perhaps consulting with a wise friend or a mentor, being reminded, right, this is what really matters to me. A quote from Father Gregory Boyle has been playing in my mind the last couple months. He said, kindness is the only non-delusional response. Kindness is the only non-delusional response. So along those lines, I was inspired by, in our in-person discussion after last week's talk, a Sangha member raised a question. She asked, where is the love in these path factors? Where is the love? And so I wanted to raise that question, lift it up, and also invite us to consider that wise view, wise intention, all the wisdom is always already here in this body-heart. Sometimes mind. The mind can be tricky, but A wise view, wisdom is here already, just waiting to be uncovered, unpeeled, layers of reactivity, layers of pain and grief, misguided disconnection. It can do us all so much good to really ground into this idea of our own potential awakening, not having to search out there for what wise view is. It can be a sense. We all know, I believe we all know what freedom feels like in this body. An insight that comes after a conversation or a sit. There's a feeling of expansiveness in the body, or settling, something. Something I really love about the Buddha's teachings on wise view is how he absolutely refused to be pinned down on opinions. There were so many times in these suttas when a monk usually is trying to get the Buddha to say, is this right? Is this right? And he just deflects. He won't answer the question. And so I think that leads to this idea that wise view is more expansive, more broad, more foundational. Of course, it can be, this is an appropriate thing to eat for breakfast or not. But more deeply, we can consider, is this a view that is leading me to contentment, to freedom? Is this a view that reminds me of the fleeting preciousness of this human life? Is this a view that is serving to untangle me, disentangle me from greed or ill will or ignorance? And there's a way that the mind can kind of grapple with that question in a very wholesome way. I'm not saying that the mind isn't useful at times. But more so, there's this tuning into the body-heart, trusting that this unit here knows. So if you're willing, I'd like to explore this, continue to explore wise view a bit with a short guided exercise. I promise it won't take more than 5 minutes. I have my mentor, Brian Lesage, to thank for this, the basis of this exercise. He has this really unique way of leading us to our own internal wisdom by mirroring ourselves against others. So that's kind of the direction we're going. So I'll invite us all to settle in a bit. If it feels comfortable for each of us, we might open to the awareness of this body. Noting how this body's doing. Maybe mentally offering this body a little care. As we open ourselves back into some kind of contemplative state, the invitation here is to bring to mind a being, that we might particularly respect, admire, feel some inspiration. It doesn't necessarily have to be a human being. It could be an animal being, a pet. It could be an element of the natural world. Some being that we feel deep fondness for, resonance, perhaps even reverence for. As the mind might settle on a being, we might both keep this being in mind and also feel into the body. Noticing if there's any sensation, energetic quality that this body might hold or associate with the presence of this other being outside of this body. And as we keep this being in our relational field, we might invite an awareness of any particular quality we associate with this being. Maybe a quality that we most respect. Might feel deep love or appreciation because of this quality in this being. Again, just noticing if any quality bubbles up without needing to strain or think too hard. And then if any quality has arisen, an opportunity to try that quality on for size. Noticing if whatever quality has arisen might be a guiding value in our own capacity for wise view in this life. Trying that quality on for size. Sometimes when there's a good fit, there could be some kind of settling in the body. a feeling of alignment, groundedness. And then taking some breaths, some intentional coming back into the room. Thank you for your generous exploration together. I think our hope for this series, there's 4 of us together, Mary Louise, Teresa, Anna, and myself. Our hope is that this series will feel unitive, that there will be bits that that we're all able to connect from each talk. And so I'm curious about this this discernment of wise view, our guiding views, guiding qualities. Anything else that's resonated from our evening together?